The morning Mason Cole was asked to leave Cornerstone Baptist Church. He was wearing the same blue tie he had worn every Sunday since he was 11 years old. His mother had given it to him the Christmas after his father left, pressing it into his small hands with a look that said, "This is all I have left to give you that means something." He had kept that promise without knowing exactly what the promise was. He had kept showing up. Every Bible study, every youth retreat, every potluck dinner in the fellowship hall where Sister Nadine's banana pudding sat untouched at the end of the table because nobody wanted to be the first to admit they loved it. Mason had loved it first. He was 26 years old, the assistant youth director, the man the congregation called our Mason with the kind of possessive warmth that felt like belonging until the exact moment it felt like a cage. He was also, undeniably, irreversibly, in love with Michael Reyes. That was the part that ended everything. It had not begun dramatically. No scandal, no moment where Mason stood in the center aisle and declared himself. What happened was smaller and more devastating than that. What happened was a letter, written in the particular 2 a.m. desperation of a man who had been praying the same prayer for 6 years and was beginning to suspect that God either could not hear him or had already answered and simply chosen not to change the answer. The letter was written to Michael and never meant to be sent. It spoke of the way Mason had felt since the first Sunday Michael Reyes walked into Cornerstone with paint still on his knuckles and a smile like an open window. It spoke of Sunday mornings and the specific gravity of sitting 2 pews apart. It spoke, carefully and honestly, about love. The letter was found by Pastor Gerald Webb on a Thursday afternoon when Mason had left his journal on the pew after a youth group setup session and gone to retrieve folding chairs from the storage closet. By Sunday, Mason had been summoned to the pastor's office before the morning service. He sat across the wide oak desk and watched Pastor Webb's face arrange itself into something between grief and certainty, the look of a man who believed he was doing the most loving thing possible and therefore could not be questioned. We have to think about the children, Mason, the families, church. Mason had nodded. He had been nodding his whole life. Down from your position. Quietly. No disruption. Become a situation. Mason looked at his hands. Framed cross-stitch on the wall that read "Love one another" in rose-colored thread. He said, "What about Michael?" Pastor Webb blinked. "Michael doesn't need to know the details." "Michael," Mason said, quietly, "was the one I wrote the letter to." The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough for Mason to understand that the conversation was already over, had been over before he sat down, was not a conversation at all but a verdict. He stood. Tie. He walked out of the office, down the carpeted hallway, past the children's Sunday school rooms with their crayon drawings of Noah's Ark taped to the cinder block walls, and out into the parking lot where the October air hit him like cold water thrown from a great height. He stood there for a long time. He had not yet learned how to cry about this particular thing because he had spent so long convincing himself it was not a thing worth crying about. His phone buzzed. "Hey, you okay? Saw you come out of Webb's office looking like someone died." Mason stared at the screen. "Talk after service?" Then he sat in his car, in the parking lot of the church he had attended for 15 years, and he waited. He could hear the organ warming up inside. He could hear Sister Nadine's voice carrying over the others in the opening hymn. He could hear his own heartbeat, slow and deliberate, the sound of a man deciding something. What he was deciding, he did not yet know, but he was deciding. Cornerstone Baptist, the way most people come to the things that change their lives, sideways, by accident, through a door that was only open because something else had recently closed. His mother had died in February. A stroke, fast and without warning, The kind of death that left no time for goodbye and therefore left everything unsaid permanently. He had driven up from Atlanta, handled the paperwork, sat in a house that still smelled like her cooking, and then found himself, 6 weeks later, in a new city, a new apartment, a new job teaching art at Brookfield Middle School, with the specific hollowness of a person who has lost their last witness. She had been the last person alive who remembered him as a child. Without her, he felt slightly unreal. He had wandered into Cornerstone on a Sunday in March, not because he believed in anything particularly, but because he had passed it on his morning run, and the doors were open and there was music coming out. Real music. Not piped-in playlist music, but actual human voices stacked on top of each other. And something in his chest had moved toward it the way a cold person moves toward a fire without deciding to. Mason had introduced himself that first Sunday with the particular directness of a man who was genuinely glad to see you and had no ulterior motive. He had said, "I'm Mason. I'm the assistant youth director. If you need anything at all, please just ask. And also, Sister Nadine's banana pudding is extraordinary. Please do not let anyone peer pressure you into avoiding it." Michael had laughed. He had laughed since February. He kept coming back. He and Mason had built the specific architecture of a friendship between two people who are both being extremely careful. They talked about music and teaching and the way certain Bible passages hit differently at different ages. They drove together to the regional youth conference in April and talked the whole 4 hours there and back about things that had nothing to do with youth ministry. Michael painted a mural in the Sunday school hallway, a blue sky full of birds, every species slightly wrong, lovingly inaccurate, and Mason brought him coffee every morning he came in to work on it and sat on the floor nearby, reading or answering emails, not making it a thing, just being present in the particular way that some people are present that makes a room feel different. Michael had known, for a while, what the warmth in his chest meant when he looked at Mason. He had also known that naming it inside a Baptist church in a mid-sized southern city was not a small thing, and so he had kept it unnamed, kept it folded away, kept showing up on Sundays in his good jeans and the blue flannel that Mason had once said made him look like he was auditioning for a folk album, which Michael had taken as a compliment. After the Sunday service that Mason had not attended, his absence noted, his empty seat in the third row from the front on the left side noticed by Michael the moment he sat down and not stopped being noticed for the entire hour. Michael found him in the parking lot, leaning against the hood of his green Subaru with his hands in his pockets and his tie loosened, looking like a man who had just survived something. Mason told him, not the letter, not the specific language of what he had written, but the shape of it. He told him he had been asked to leave his position. He told him why. Watching Michael's face, braced for almost anything. What he was not braced for was Michael's expression, which was not shock and was not discomfort and was not the slow withdrawal that Mason had been rehearsing for in his head for years. It was something quieter. If Mason was reading it correctly, and he had spent 6 years becoming very good at reading Michael Reyes, like recognition. "How long?" Michael said. "Have you been carrying this?" "Since I was about 20, Mason said. "Give or take." Michael was quiet for a moment. On them, cars pulling out one by one, Sunday voices fading. "They read your letter? My journal?" "Yeah." Michael paused. "Asked you to leave? Like that?" Quietly, Mason said, with a dry, precise bitterness that surprised him. "They didn't want it to become a situation." Michael looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Mason, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it all the way through before you say anything." Mason nodded. Michael said, "And the only reason I kept coming back after the first Sunday is standing right in front of me. I think you know that, for a while, and I think you've been protecting me from it, and I don't." His voice was steady, but there was something working very hard underneath it, I don't need you to protect me from it anymore. The October light fell between them. Mason's hands were shaking very slightly inside his pockets. What are you saying? He said, not because he didn't know but because he needed to hear it cross the distance between them out loud. I'm saying, Michael said, that I'm angry that they did this to you. And I'm saying that you are not alone in this parking lot. And I'm saying, he took one breath, that I've been writing my own version of that letter in my head for months. And I never sent it either. They sat in Mason's car for 2 hours. Not doing anything, not going anywhere. Just sitting in the parking lot of Cornerstone Baptist with the engine off and the heat slowly leaving the interior and talking in the way that two people talk when a wall has just come down that had been load-bearing for a very long time and they are still figuring out whether the ceiling will hold. Mason talked about being 19 and sitting in a college dorm room reading Leviticus with a highlighter and a pit in his stomach the size of a fist. He talked about the prayer group he had joined junior year, the one that met on Tuesday nights in a campus ministry office that smelled like old carpet and good intentions, where a well-meaning leader had told him that the feeling was a test and that passing the test meant not acting on it. Ever, which at the time had felt like a lifeline and in retrospect felt like being handed a rope with specific instructions on how to tie it around yourself. He talked about coming home after graduation and sliding back into Cornerstone like a key into a lock. The fit so perfect and so relieving that he had told himself the prayer was working. He had told himself this for years. He had become useful. He had become our Mason. He had built a life inside the church the way you build a life inside any structure that feels safe. By not testing the walls. Michael listened. He did not offer theology. Person asks questions when they genuinely want to know the answer and not when they want to steer you toward a particular one. Then Michael talked, growing up Catholic in a Cuban-American family in Miami, where the church was not separate from the culture but woven all the way through it, where his grandmother lit candles for the saints and his uncle was a deacon and the idea of leaving would have been the idea of leaving his own name. He talked about the first boy he had ever loved, a boy named Raphael in the 11th grade who had the longest eyelashes Michael had ever seen and who had kissed him once behind the bleachers at a Friday night football game and then spent the next 3 years pretending it hadn't happened. He talked about how he had learned from that to do the same, to pretend. Michael said, the pretending, that I would forget, for months at a time, that I was doing it, and then something would happen, Mason said, because he understood. And then something would happen, Michael agreed. They sat with that. The parking lot was fully empty. The church stood behind them, white-clabbered and a simple cross on the steeple, the afternoon sun making it look like a painting of a thing rather than the thing itself. What are you going to do? Michael asked. Mason had been thinking about this. He had been thinking about it since the moment he left Pastor Webb's office, the thought running under everything else like a current. There's a church meeting Wednesday night, he said. Monthly Deacons Board meeting. To community announcements. Anyone can speak. I'm going to speak, Mason said. The silence was careful. Mason, you understand that it won't change their position. Webb isn't going to, I know, Mason said again. That's not why I'm going to do it. At the church. He thought about the children's Sunday school rooms. The crayon drawings Michael had painted in the hallway, every bird slightly wrong and completely full of life. He thought about the kids who came to youth group on Wednesday evenings, the ones who were 15 and 16 and carrying things they didn't have words for yet, the ones he had been quietly, carefully trying to create space for without ever naming what the space was for. Because, he said, someone should have said something a long time ago, and I was always waiting for someone else to be the one to say it. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'll be there. Mason looked at him. I know, Michael said, and there was something in the way he said it that closed that particular argument completely. They sat for another moment. The late afternoon kind that makes everything look more important than it is, or possibly exactly as important as it actually is. Mason reached over and adjusted his blue tie without thinking about it. Michael watched him do it. Said, "My mother gave it to me. Every Sunday I've been here." Mason looked down at it. "I didn't think anyone noticed." That simply. It was not a dramatic statement. It was not accompanied by music or a meaningful look or any of the architecture of a romantic moment. It was just the truth, delivered plainly, by a man who had been paying attention. And somehow that was more than Mason had been given in a very long time. He did not say anything. He started the car. Wednesday came like a held breath finally released. Mason spent the 3 days between Sunday and Wednesday in a state of strange calm that he recognized, from enough years of self-examination, as the specific peace that arrives when you have finally stopped fighting something. He was not happy. Exactly. He was not at ease. And clarity, he had learned, was its own kind of mercy. He wrote and rewrote what he was going to say. Not a script. He had never worked from a script. Had always spoken at youth events and Bible studies and retreats from something closer to the center of himself, but an outline, a spine, onto if his hands started shaking. He called his mother on Monday evening. She lived 40 minutes away, in the same house he had grown up in, and she had been a member of Cornerstone for 31 years. He had not told her yet. The call lasted an hour and 20 minutes. The first 40 were difficult in ways he had not fully anticipated. His mother was a woman of deep faith and also a woman of deep love, and those two things were, for her, in a collision he could hear happening in real time on the other end of the phone. She cried. Questions that he answered honestly. She went quiet in ways that could have meant anything. And then, near the end, she said, "Mason, I have not always understood you, but I have always known you were good. Whatever you need to do on Wednesday, you do it." He held the phone for a long time after she hung up. Michael texted at 10 that night. "You still planning to go through with it?" Mason wrote back, "Yeah." 3 dots appeared. Then, "I finished the speech I'm going to give before yours." Mason stared at his phone. "I talked to Deacon Harris." The announcement. He said fine. Doesn't know what it's about. "I'm going first." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Mason. Mason sat on the edge of his bed in the apartment he had lived in for 4 years, surrounded by bookshelves and a guitar he rarely played and a framed print of a hopper painting over the fireplace. And he felt something shift in him that had been braced in one position for so long that the shift was almost physical. He typed, "Why?" disappeared twice before Michael's answer came through. "Because you've been standing alone in this for long enough. And I'm done pretending I don't see that." Wednesday evening, Cornerstone's fellowship hall was arranged in its standard board meeting configuration. Long folding tables in a rectangle, metal chairs, fluorescent lights, a coffee urn on the counter near the door. Approximately 40 people were present. Deacons, elders, regular members, a few faces Mason recognized from youth group families. Pastor Webb sat at the head of the table and did not look at Mason when he walked in. This was, Mason noticed, a specific and practiced not looking. Michael was already there, seated near the back, in his blue flannel. Deacon Harris opened the meeting, ran through the prayer and the announcements preamble, and then said that 2 community members had signed up to speak. Michael stood first, stood straight, unhurried, the particular ease of a man who is comfortable in his own body because he has made peace with it at some cost. He said, "My name is Michael Reyes. I've been attending Cornerstone for 6 months. I teach art at Brookfield Middle School. I painted the mural in the Sunday school hallway. Most of you have been kind to me, and I want to say that that kindness has meant something real. He paused. I want that to be said out loud in this room, not as a confession but as a fact. And I'm standing up first tonight because the man who is going to speak after me has spent his entire adult life in this church, has given more to this community than almost anyone in this room, and he was asked to leave quietly last Sunday. I don't think quietly is the right word for what happened. I think it deserves to be said clearly. The room was absolutely still. Pastor Webb's face had gone the particular gray of a man watching something unfold that he calculated would not unfold. Michael said, "I'll let Mason speak for himself. I just wanted this room to know that he is not alone, and that I am glad to be standing here." He sat down. He had not planned for his hands to be steady. They were. Oh, what that meant, except that sometimes the body knows something the mind is still working out. He looked around the room, faces since childhood. Sister Nadine in her usual seat near the window. The Hartley family, Jim and Carol, who had led his confirmation class. Deacon Harris with his careful, watchful expression. Younger faces too, the Garza family, whose son Tyler was 15 and had been in Mason's youth group for 2 years. Tyler now staring at his own folded hands with an intensity that Mason recognized with a precision that was almost painful. He began, saying that I love this church. He said it plainly, without irony, because it was true. I grew up here. I learned how to read using the Sunday school materials in room 4. I have been in this building on the worst days of my life and on the best days of my life and on every ordinary day in between. And this place has meant more to me than I know how to say quickly. He paused. I was asked to leave my position as assistant youth director. The reason is that Pastor Webb read a private letter in which I expressed that I am gay and that I have feelings for someone in this congregation. I want to be clear that this was a private letter found in a private journal. And I want to be equally clear that I am not telling you this to create conflict. I'm telling you because I was asked to leave quietly, and I don't think quietly is the right word for what has happened to me. Not because I want a scene. Deserves a room. The silence in the fellowship hall was the particular silence of people who are thinking and breathing and trying to keep their faces neutral all at the same time. I have been a youth director for 4 years. Before that, I was a volunteer in this program for 3 years. In that time, I have worked with over 200 kids. Some of those kids have come to me in hard moments. They've sat across from me in my office, or in the back row of the van on the way home from a retreat, or in the parking lot after a service. And they have told me things they couldn't tell anyone else. Things about who they are. Things they thought made them unlovable. His voice did not break. He had not expected that. I told every single one of them the same thing. I told them they were not alone, and I told them they were not broken, and I told them that being known, truly known, was possible, even when it felt like the most impossible thing in the world. He looked at Tyler Garza, deliberately, not to single him out, but because the boy had not looked up yet and Mason needed him to look up. Tyler looked up. I told them that because I believed it. I still believe it. Here right now, and I am scared and I am still standing. I believe it. Pastor Webb cleared his throat. Mason, I think we all appreciate your... I'm not finished, Mason said. It was not rude. It was simply accurate, and the simple accuracy of it stopped the pastor mid-sentence. I'm not asking this church to change its theology tonight. I understand that's not how this works. I understand that there are people in this room who genuinely believe they are doing right by me, who believe that asking me to leave quietly is an act of mercy. I'm not here to argue with that. like to be on the receiving end of it. He took a breath. Told that the love you have is the one kind that doesn't count. It feels like being told that the community you have built your entire life inside of is conditional. It feels like being 15 years old and sitting in a pew and wondering if God made a mistake when he made you, and never hearing an adult in this building say, no, he didn't. Mistake. His voice did break here. That last sentence. He let it. That's all I wanted to say. I'm not issuing ultimatums. I've said. And if there are people in this room, young people especially, who heard something tonight that they needed to hear, then this was worth it. Whatever happens next, this was worth it. He sat down. Erupt. People did not stand and applaud. This was not a movie. And in some ways more significant. Nobody moved. Nobody rushed to fill the silence with emotion or a procedural point or a counter-argument. For a full 30 seconds, Mason counted, the room simply sat with what he had said. Sister Nadine, 73 years old, who had been at Cornerstone since before Mason was born, reached across the table and put her hand over Mason's without saying anything at all. The meeting ended without resolution, which was the only honest way it could have ended. There was no vote. There was no dramatic reversal. Pastor Webb closed in prayer, a careful, diplomatic prayer that named love and discernment and community in equal measure and committed to nothing specific, and people filed out into the night in small clusters, voices low, the particular murmur of a group that has been given something to think about and is not yet ready to think about it out loud. Mason stayed in his seat while the room emptied. Michael stayed too, pulling his chair around to sit beside him rather than across. A small and deliberate repositioning that said something neither of them needed to put into words. Tyler Garza was the last one to leave. He stopped at the door, his jacket half on, and looked back at Mason. He was 15 and trying very hard to look like a person who had not just heard something that rearranged something inside him. He was not entirely succeeding. He said, "Mister," at him. Tyler started, and stopped, and started again. "Thanks." Mason looked at the door for a moment. Then he looked at his hands on the table. The blue tie. Quietly, "You okay?" "I don't know yet," Mason said, which was honest. "Ask me in a week." "I'll ask you every day until you know." Mason looked at him. It was not a grand statement, like it was simply the next logical thing, which maybe it was. Maybe that was the thing Mason had been missing, the distinction between the grand gesture and the simple, daily, repeated choice to be present. He had spent so long waiting for the first that he had not known what to do when someone offered him the second. "Michael," he said, "next. With the church. I genuinely don't know." "I know you don't," Michael said. "Neither do I." Michael considered this honestly, the way he considered most things. "It scares me a little," he said. "But I've been in worse positions. I've been alone in this for a long time. He glanced sideways at Mason. "This is better than alone." They sat in the empty fellowship hall for a while longer. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The coffee urn on the counter had gone cold. Outside, the last of the cars pulled out of the parking lot and the night settled over the white-clapboard church. And somewhere inside that building the blue sky mural was still on the wall of the Sunday school hallway. Every bird slightly wrong. Every bird completely alive. In the days that followed, things shifted in the ways that real things shift. Gradually, incompletely, without the clean resolution that a story is supposed to provide. 3 families reached out to Mason privately. 2 of them were parents of kids in the youth group. One of them was Jim Hartley, who had led Mason's confirmation class, who called on a Thursday morning and said, In his careful, slow way, "I don't know what the right answer is, Mason, but I think what you did took courage. And I wanted you to know I heard you." Container of banana pudding at his apartment on Friday. She said nothing about the meeting. Eat something, and left. It was, Mason thought, possibly the most perfect thing anyone had said to him all week. Pastor Webb sent a formal email confirming Mason's removal from his volunteer position, citing the church's statement of faith. The email was carefully worded and contained the word prayerfully 3 times. Mason read it once, closed it, and did not read it again. Tyler Garza texted from an unknown number that Sunday, "Hey, it's Tyler. I just wanted to say that thing you said about being 15 and wondering. Thanks." Mason held his phone for a long time. He wrote back, "You are not alone. You never were." He and Michael drove out to the state park that Sunday, the one with the ridge trail that looked out over the whole valley, the one Mason had been meaning to visit for 2 years and never found the right occasion for. They walked the trail in the October air, which was cold and clear and smelled like something ending and something else not quite beginning yet but close. At the top of the ridge, Mason stopped and looked out over the valley. The town spread below them, the church steeple visible among the trees, white and small from this distance, a landmark, a reference point, a place he had come from. He thought about the blue tie on the phone, about 15-year-old Mason in the third pew from the front trying to make himself smaller than his own heart. Michael stopped beside him, a while, which was not the same as silence but was instead the sound of 2 people who were learning that they did not need to fill every space between them, that some spaces were not empty but full of something that hadn't found its shape yet. The valley was gold and rust and the last green before winter. Below them, somewhere, a church and a boy named Tyler and a container of banana pudding and a mural of slightly wrong birds on a cinder block wall. And here, on this ridge, in this cold and clarifying air, Mason Cole in his blue tie with his hands not shaking, standing next to the person he had written a letter to at 2 a.m., in the specific desperation of a man who was finally done pretending. Not a resolution. Something true. Something, at last, said out loud.